Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of August. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. In the West Bank overnight, hundreds of soldiers and police raided 7 warehouses used to manufacture weapons and 22 metalworks plants in the Hebron and Bethlehem areas, shutting them down. Security forces confiscated 54 weapons, including pistols and rifles, ammunition clips and weapons parts, as well as advanced machinery used to make the weapons. They loaded them onto trucks and hauled them away. 2 men suspected of being key weapons dealers were among a number of Palestinians arrested and handed over to the Shin Bet Security Agency for questioning. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman said that rehabilitation in exchange for demilitarization is the guiding policy toward Hamas in Gaza. He was speaking during a tour of the northern border this morning and asked about the recent flare-up on the southern frontier after a rocket was fired from Gaza to Sderot, causing damage but no injuries. The Air Force retaliated, pounding some 50 suspected Hamas targets. One cannot expect the Jewish state to sit by and allow Hamas to strengthen its military capability, Lieberman said. His visit in the north came hours after the Air Force last night attacked a Syrian army mortar launcher near Quneitra in retaliation for a mortar shell fired into the Golan Heights. The army said the errant mortar fire was the result of internal fighting between Syrian military and rebel forces. Israel and Turkey are still conducting a war of words over Israeli policy toward the Gaza Strip, despite the reconciliation deal approved last week by the Turkish parliament. Here with the story is IBA's diplomatic reporter Kalev Ben David. Kalev?
Thanks, Aryeh. Any notion that the resumption of diplomatic ties finalized this month between Israel and Turkey would ease their disagreements over Gaza has been thoroughly disproved. The Turkish government condemned Israeli airstrikes on Gaza targets made in response to the rocket fired on Sderot Sunday from the Hamas-controlled territory, saying there is no justification for attacks that harm Palestinian civilians. The statement from Turkey's foreign ministry added that Israeli aggression is damaging the peace process, and the reconciliation deal will not inhibit further Turkish criticism of Israeli actions. Those remarks drew a blistering response from Israel's foreign ministry, which said the normalization of relations does not mean Israel will keep quiet in the face of baseless Turkish condemnations. Israel will continue to defend itself from Gaza rocket attacks, and Turkey should think twice before criticizing the military actions of other nations, the statement added. The Turkish condemnation of Israel came shortly after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had issued a statement of support for Turkey following the terrorist bombing that killed over 50 people in the southern city of Gaziantep. And Israel's sharp response clearly reflected exasperation with the government of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a persistent critic of Israeli policies toward the Palestinians. Israeli officials say they don't believe this latest flap will derail the reconciliation process, and in the coming weeks, both nations are expected for the first time in 7 years to officially exchange ambassadors, who will clearly have their work cut out for them. Aryeh?
Thanks, Kalev. Israel's ambassador Aviva Raz-Shechter formally took office in the UN Human Rights Council after presenting her credentials at the UN headquarters in Geneva yesterday. Raz-Shechter is assigned to the United Nations body that has issued over 62 resolutions against Israel, more than any other country. She told reporters she is looking forward to engaging with her colleagues, noting that the UN bodies and agencies have taken biased decisions against Israel. Raz-Shechter, who speaks 4 languages, Hebrew, English, Arabic, and French, served as the Deputy Director General for the Foreign Ministry's Middle East and Peace Process Division prior to her latest appointment. Now, there has been a lot of talk about a 2-state solution with the Palestinians, and recent polls show that it's still supported by a slim majority on both sides. Conversely, the idea of a 1-state solution is gaining popularity. Now there is a new, innovative idea to reach a 1-state solution based on a federated state. Joining us now from our Tel Aviv studio is Emmanuel Shachaf, the founder of the Federation Movement. Emmanuel, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Aryeh.
Well, Emmanuel, tell us more about this idea, and how is this a realistic alternative approach?
Well, I think it's the most realistic alternative today. First of all, because it requires the least motion by anybody. Nobody has to move anywhere. Everything stays in place. We're just moving towards a more modern form of governance. We are talking basically about extending Israeli law over the West Bank and installing a federal government in the whole of Israel.
Well, how would this federation, after giving the Palestinians full citizenship, not turn Israel, the Jewish state, into a binational state? Or is this the end of the Zionist dream?
I think we should get away from identity politics. I think what modern nations and states try to do, they try to provide all their citizens, no matter what their background and identities are, with a safe and economically good surrounding, and so everybody can feel comfortable, and that's what we have to do. Every nationality, every identity should feel comfortable, whoever they are, and that's what modern states do now.
Well, Emmanuel, how do you deal with the Palestinian demands for the so-called right of return by refugees?
Well, of course, there will not be a right of return. That has to be clear from the outset. We're talking about a state of Israel. Basically, we're making the state just bigger in terms of territory and extending citizenship to everybody who lives there and who is interested in citizenship. That is really the only change we do. And of course, splitting up the country into 30 semi-autonomous regions where everybody can feel as comfortable as possible.
Well, how receptive has this idea been with any of your Palestinian colleagues? I'm not aware of any proposal of Jewish settlers remaining being accepted by any Palestinians.
Well, as you mentioned, our settlers will stay in place. What I have gathered from the Palestinians is that their main concern is really getting rights, civil rights, full civil rights, and their economic well-being more than anything else. It's much more important to them there than expressing their national identity. And I was surprised because I even talked to people high up in the PA, who used to be in the PA, and they were also quite easily willing to relinquish the state, their Palestinian state, as long as they get equal rights.
Romano, you were a former member of Israel's intelligence community. How did you get around to this federation idea?
Well, actually, I started looking about 3 years ago. I'm a political activist in the Labour Party, and about 3 years ago, I started to realize that the two-state solution is not going anywhere, and that we have to look for alternative solutions. And came along a good friend of mine, Aryeh Hess from Jerusalem, political activist, and he'd been working on the federation for quite a long time. And we got together, and now for the last 2 years, we've been really pushing it, and we're now going public, trying to gather as many supporters as possible. And looking from the polls you just talked about, we already starting with 20% support in Israel and 34% in the Palestinian Authority. So it's not a bad thing to start with. Without even having launched.
So your idea calls for Israel's borders to be extended to the West Bank and encompass the 2.5 million Palestinians there, but you conveniently leave out the 1.7 million Gazans. What do you expect them to do, just wash out to the sea?
No, first of all, it's not conveniently left out. It's out because that's the situation today. Gaza is actually functioning as an independent state today, and it has to be dealt with, but it can't be incorporated into this arrangement because the Jewish state will not relinquish a majority over its sovereignty. So we have to take it as it is. And as the situation is right now, I think even the Palestinians have a problem getting together with Gaza, so let's leave it as it is.
Are there any international bodies which expressed any kind of interest in this idea?
Well, what is clear is, and I've been talking to the international community, that they will accept anything that we agree with the Palestinians. Okay? The fact that the international community is pushing the two-state solution is only because that is what the Palestinian Authority and supposedly also the government of Israel are pushing. But once we get our act together on something different, on an alternative solution like the federation, foreign support will certainly be forthcoming because obviously we're talking about a solution which follows international law and gives everybody equal rights.
Well, Emmanuel Shachaf, the founder of the Federation Movement, good luck and thank you for coming on the IBA.
Thank you.
Soldiers and police were forced to extricate a busload of Bratslav followers who went into the PA-controlled Nablus overnight to pray at the Joseph's tomb without bothering to coordinate their entry with the army. The Jewish worshippers entered the Palestinian city in a bus with Palestinian number plates before dawn, when they came under a barrage of stones thrown by local Arabs. The bus driver fled the area, leaving the group stranded. IDF and police forces arrived at the site, and medical personnel treated 2 Israelis who were lightly injured from the stone throwing and taken to hospital. The army has stressed that Israeli citizens are barred from entering Area A in the West Bank, areas which are under control of the Palestinian Authority. The army said it will safeguard Israelis seeking to pray at Joseph's tomb, but only after their entry has been coordinated with the defense establishment, noting that the failure to do so endangers lives. Police detained 32 members of the group for questioning. Also in Nablus, Palestinian police allegedly beat to death this morning an Arab man, Akram Rajoub, who was being held in custody in the Junaid prison. Palestinian media reports in the West Bank said Rajoub was arrested by Palestinian security forces in the city's Old City area on suspicion of being involved in the deadly shooting of a Palestinian police officer last week. Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah said a special inquiry will be set up to investigate the alleged lynching. The Rambam Synagogue in Jerusalem's Kadamon neighborhood has appointed a woman as a rabbi, a first for an Orthodox congregation in Israel. Rabbinit Karmit Feintuch will serve alongside Rabbi Benny Lau with the unanimous approval of the synagogue committee. Rabbinit Feintuch, who previously was an educator at the Migdal Oz Women's Seminary in Gush Etzion. Several modern Orthodox synagogues in the United States have hired women for top positions, including with the title rabbi, since Yeshivat Maharat began ordaining Orthodox women. And the settlement Efrat has a female spiritual leader since 2015. However, this appointment is the first of its kind in Israel. Rabbi Lau denied this was not a radical step, asking rhetorically, more than 50% of the community are women, so why shouldn't there be a woman in leadership positions? Scientists at Tel Aviv University researching the spread of melanoma may have discovered a way to stop the deadly skin cancer from spreading. According to research published yesterday, melanoma spreads from the outer layer of the skin to the internal organs by ejecting tiny sacs containing molecules of microRNA, which prepare the inner layer of the skin to receive and transport cancer cells by giving the tumor access to the bloodstream. This means the threat of melanoma is not the initial tumor, argues researcher leader Dr. Karmit Levy, but in the metastasis, the spreading of the tumor cells inside the body. She explained that unlocking this mechanism gives medicine a way to stop the cancer spreading, and that researchers have tested 2 chemicals that do this, providing a basis for future treatment. As it stands, there is no remedy for melanoma, which claims 1 life worldwide every 52 minutes. It could soon be illegal to discriminate against people in Israel for being overweight or insult them if 3 bills introduced by Meretz MK Tamar Zandberg passed through the Knesset. The 3 amendments would prohibit businesses from denying commercial services to people on account of their weight, would bar potential employers from discriminating on those grounds, and would empower the overweight to sue those who insult them or exclude them for their weight. Zandberg said it is time to change the situation in which overweight people are discriminated against in the search for employment and publicly ridiculed. She drafted the bill together with the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, which last week asked the Israeli Medical Association to stop doctors commenting on patients' weights other than were medically relevant, noting fat phobia is the new homophobia. The Delek Group has signed an agreement to sell its controlling stake in insurance and investment group Phoenix to the Chinese holding company Yango Investment. The 52.3% share will be sold for 1.948 billion shekels in cash. The sale is part of an ongoing effort by Delek to shed its financial businesses in favor of the energy sector. It requires approval by the State Supervisor of Capital Markets, Insurance and Savings before completion. Yango Investment is a unit of Fujian Yango, believed to be in private ownership, which appears to be making its first foray into finance with the acquisition of this Israeli company. Turning to sports, where all eyes are on Beersheva tonight, where Hapoel Beersheva will be hosting the Scottish powerhouse Celtic Park in a return match. A large number of police and other security forces are to be on hand to prevent any friction between the Hapoel fans and some 250 Celtic fans who have come to Israel for the match. Police say they will not allow the Celtic fans to taunt Israeli fans by displaying Palestinian flags. The Celtics already defeated Hapoel Beersheva 5-2 in an earlier match and are close to qualifying for the Champions League. But their coach says they need to keep their focus on beating Beersheva.
You know, for us, our focus is on ourselves. You know, we did the job in the first leg. You know, the responsibility is now with us, and that's how you would want it. Like I say, you see a lot of the games, you know, across Europe are going to be tough and they're going to be tight, and there's a three goal difference in this game, but it'll still be a tough game for us. But thankfully for us, it's our responsibility. You know, we worked very, very hard in the last game. The quality of our game has got us into this position. So that gives us great confidence. But we'll always respect them and the opponent. But we know that, as I said, we're in a good moment.
Pumpkin Flowers, A Soldier Story, is the latest book by award-winning author and journalist Matthew Friedman, in which he recalls the history of the South Lebanon security zone and his own time there as an Israeli soldier. IBA's Elon Aslan-Levy met with Matthew to discuss.
Matty, your book deals with the obscure period between the end of the First Lebanon War and the official Israeli withdrawal in 2000. What was this conflict about?
After Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, very quickly the plan went awry and Israel executes a withdrawal almost to the Israeli border, but not quite. And it keeps a buffer zone in South Lebanon that became known as the security zone. The buffer zone was initially intended to keep Palestinian guerrillas away from the border. The enemy changes over the years, and it eventually becomes a low-scale guerrilla war against a local Shia organization called Hezbollah. And throughout the 1990s, Israeli troops in South Lebanon conducted a war. Essentially, it was a war that was usually not called a war against Hezbollah, which started the 90s as a kind of peripheral player and ended the 90s as one of the most important actors in the Middle East.
So you call this period the Forgotten Little War. Why did Israel never give it a name?
And when you give something a name, it's a recognition that it's important. The little war in Lebanon, which went on for 10 years or 15 years, depending on how you're counting, never penetrated the consciousness to the extent that these other wars did. And as soon as it ended in 2000 with a withdrawal, which certainly wasn't a victory, I think people decided that it was best forgotten. It was very hard to talk about it. It was very hard to justify the loss of more than 400 soldiers who died in the security zone.
In what ways do you think that this Forgotten Little War did impact on the Israeli consciousness?
This period that I'm talking about, which lasted 15 years, is the subject of no serious historical book. There's not even one book if you're looking for an academic study of the period. So I think that, yes, the country has forgotten it. It never gave it a name. There's no monument. There's no ribbon. And there's no military ribbon for soldiers who served in that time. The country would rather not think about it. If you think about Lebanon in the 90s too hard, you might be forced to reach the conclusion that it was a mistake. Israel in 2016, maybe the Middle East in 2016, I think both are inexplicable unless you understand what happened in South Lebanon in the 1990s. In the 90s, because I served there as a soldier, we experienced a war that involved IEDs, hit-and-run attacks, Muslim guerrillas operating in a failed and kind of chaotic state, videotaped attacks. And these are all elements of what is now recognizable as 21st century warfare. And in many ways, the war in South Lebanon was the first war of the 21st century.
Are you arguing that guerrilla forces in Afghanistan, Iraq drew direct inspiration from attacks that were first tried out on Israeli soldiers as guinea pigs for this new warfare?
Yes. In the 1990s, the Arab world, the broader Islamic world, watched a small guerrilla force motivated by ideology, very committed, willing to sacrifice, using tactics like suicide bombings, using video as a weapon against the weaknesses of a democracy, in doing this in a very effective way. And they watched this enemy, Hezbollah, against incredible odds, defeat an army that's considered one of the most important regional powers. The war in Lebanon ends in 2000 with an Israeli withdrawal. The next year, 9/11 happens, and very soon the Americans are in Afghanistan, and then they're in Iraq, and we see the same tactics repeated by the kids who had grown up in the 90s watching Hezbollah beat the Israelis.
For those of you who enjoy dancing, tonight at the Susan Dalal Center in Tel Aviv, the divas of Israel's flamenco will tout their steps in what is being described as an homage to the greatest flamenco dancers of all times. During tonight's performance, the dancers will portray the traditions, lives, and stories of their role models. Tonight's event also celebrates 30 years of diplomacy between Israel and Spain. Very nice. In local finance news, trading on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange was mixed today, and the shekel was also mixed in trading against major foreign currencies. Here's a look at the late afternoon numbers. As for the weather, the IBA weather team says it will be the same as today. Here are the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's all for this newscast. Please join us again tomorrow when Laura Cornfield will be at this desk to bring you the latest news from Israel. Please join her. Until then, I'm Aria O'Sullivan wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.